Prioritized oversight is one of our seminal responsibilities. Part of that responsibility is to periodically review the effectiveness of our laws. And I think it's a good and timely thing that we are now turning our attention to technological innovations, which brings us to all of your companies. Our country stricken by a pandemic becomes a dramatic illustration of the extraordinarily reliance Americans have on technological innovations. In these unexpected and unprecedented times, your companies have provided innovations so our nations can meet a myriad of our daily needs: the delivery of groceries, virtual visits with doctors, connecting socially distant families, or keeping our small and large businesses connected. With that responsibility comes an increased scrutiny of your dominance in the marketplace. I want to reiterate something I've said throughout this investigation. Being big is not inherently bad. Quite the opposite. In America, you should be rewarded for success. We are here to better understand the role your companies have in the digital marketplace, and importantly, the effect they have on consumers and the public at large. You lead some of today's more powerful companies, and my colleagues and I have a great interest about what your companies do with that accumulated power. We also know that the tech marketplace is driven by data. So it follows that those who control the data, in essence, control the marketplace. There are broader questions surrounding data, however. Who owns the data? What responsibilities do companies have to share it with their customers or their competitors? What is the fair market value of that data? Is there anything monopolistic in acquiring this data? And what about monetizing it? These are complex issues that Congress, regulators, and even your own companies are wrestling with in the current technological landscape, and the answers to which we owe the American consumers. Since the tech investigation began, we have heard rumblings from many who are quick to say your successful companies have grown too large. Since this hearing was announced, it seems that those complaints have gotten even louder. While I find these complaints informative, I don't plan on litigating each of these complaints today. Antitrust law and the consumer welfare standard have served this country well for over a century. Those laws have provided the framework and creativity to make way for some of our most successful and innovative companies. I will be the first to highlight that. However, as the business landscape evolves, we must ensure that our existing antitrust laws are applied to meet the needs of our country and its consumers. I share the concern that market dominance in the digital space is ripe for abuse, particularly when it comes to free speech. As we know, companies like Facebook, Google's YouTube, and Twitter have become the public square of today where political debate unfolds in real time. But reports that dissenting views, often conservative views, are targeted or censored is seriously troubling. Conservatives are consumers too, and they need the protection of the antitrust laws. The power to influence debate carries with it remarkable responsibilities. So let the facts be our guide here. Your companies are large. That's not a problem. Your companies are successful. That's not a problem either. But I want to leave here today with a more complete picture of how your individual companies use your size, success, and power, and what it means to the American consumer. And I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Now the chair now recognizes the distinguished chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, and the subcommittee members for the tremendous effort that you have all put into the subcommittee's investigation. I appreciate your calling this hearing today so that we can hear directly from the leaders of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, and I look forward to an important dialogue. Today, it is effectively impossible to use the internet without using, in one way or another, the services of these four companies. I have long believed, with Thomas Jefferson and Louis Brandeis, that concentration of power in any form, especially concentration of economic or political power, is dangerous to a democratic society. That is why we must examine these and other companies that play a dominant role in our economy and in our society, and ensure that our antitrust laws give enforcers the tools they need to preserve a healthy marketplace. These principles have guided this committee's year-long investigation into competition in digital markets, and they are the lens through which I approach today's hearing. The open internet has delivered enormous benefits to Americans, including a surge of economic opportunity, massive investment, and new pathways for education online. But there is growing evidence that a handful of corporations have come to capture an outsized share of online commerce communications. From providing the dominant search platform, retail platform, and online messaging platform, to providing the underlying mapping services and cloud computing on which hundreds of thousands of other businesses rely, these dominant platforms now comprise the essential infrastructure for the 21st century. By virtue of controlling essential infrastructure, these companies have the ability to control access to markets. In some basic ways, the problem is not unlike what we faced 130 years ago, when railroads transformed American life, both enabling farmers and producers to access new markets, but also creating a key chokehold that the railroad monopolies could exploit. Railroads notoriously abuse this gatekeeper power in a variety of ways. They charge tolls, extorting the producers reliant on their rails. They discriminated among farmers, picking winners and losers across the economy. And by expanding into lines of business that competed directly with producers, they could use their dominance in transportation to favor their own services. These tactics by the railroads spurred fury and despair across the country. Congress initiated investigations to document these problems and enacted legislative solutions to halt and outlaw these anti-competitive practices in the railroad industry and other industries dominated by unregulated monopolies and trusts. Importantly, congressional oversight and legislative reforms during this period did not prevent or encumber the inexorable arrival of new technology or human progress. Instead, Congress recognized that these powerful new technologies had reshaped the balance of power in our economy, and that it was the role of Congress to ensure that the new monopolists could not abuse their power. Today, the digital economy poses similar challenges. While the underlying technology is dramatically different, of course, new digital intermediaries have the ability to control access to critical markets. If you are an independent merchant, developer, or content producer, you are increasingly reliant on these powerful intermediaries to access markets and consumers. Across the economy, many businesses live in fear of exclusion from these platforms, a fact that some companies have shared with the committee over the past year during this investigation. The subcommittee's current review of competition in the digital marketplace continues a long tradition in this committee of oversight of the antitrust laws and our economy. From the days of Chairman Emanuel Seller, the House Judiciary Committee and its Antitrust Subcommittee have conducted careful, fact-based inquiries into industrial sectors showing signs of consolidation and anti-competitive conduct. This has continued on a bipartisan basis over the years, from Chairman Brooks and Hyde to Chairman Sensenbrenner's and Conyers and others. As a 1950 report from the then-named Subcommittee on Monopoly Power described our mandate, quote, "It is the province of this subcommittee to investigate factors which tend to eliminate competition, strengthen monopolies, injure small businesses, or promote undue concentration of economic power, to ascertain the facts and to make recommendations based on those findings." Following in this proud tradition, our investigation has held hearings with industry and government witnesses, consultations with subject matter experts, and a careful and at times painstaking review of large volumes of evidence provided by industry participants and regulators. While ultimately it is the responsibility of the antitrust enforcement agencies to enforce the law, Congress has an obligation to assess whether existing antitrust laws and competition policies and the will to enforce those laws and policies are adequate to address the competition issues facing our country and to take action if they are found to be lacking. Given the dominant role that these four companies play in our economy and our society, it is only reasonable that our careful examination of the antitrust laws begin with them. I appreciate the participation of all of our witnesses today. Our investigation would not be complete. Indeed, it has hardly begun without hearing directly from the decision makers at these companies, and I look forward to their testimony and to today's discussion. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to thank the ranking member of this subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner. I'm not sure how many more committee hearings this subcommittee or the full committee are going to have this Congress, but I want to thank Jim for his great work for the constituents of his district in Wisconsin for this many years and for the work he has done for this entire committee. I'll just cut to the chase. Big tech's out to get conservatives. That's not a suspicion. That's not a hunch. That's a fact. July 20th, 2020, Google removes the homepages of Breitbart and the Daily Caller. Just last night, we learned Google has censored Breitbart so much traffic has declined 99%. June 16th, 2020, Google threatens to demonetize and ban the Federalist. April 19th, 2020, Google and YouTube announce a policy censoring the content that conflicts with recommendations of the World Health Organization. Now think about that. The World Health Organization, the organization that lied to us, the organization that shilled for China. And if you contradict something they say, they can say whatever they want. They can lie for China. They can shill for China. You say something against them, you get censored. June 29th, 2020, Amazon bans President Trump's account on Twitch after he raises concerns about defunding the police. June 4th, 2020, Amazon bans a book critical of the coronavirus lockdowns written by a conservative commentator. May 27th, 2020, Amazon Smile won't let you give to the Family Research Council and the Alliance Defense Fund, but you can give to Planned Parenthood. Facebook, June 19th, 2020, takes down posts from President Trump's re-election campaign. November 1st, 2018, Facebook silences a pro-life organization's advertisement. May 19th, 2016, former Facebook employees admit Facebook routinely suppresses conservative views. And I haven't even mentioned Twitter, who we actually invited, Mr. Chairman. We asked for you guys to invite them as one of our witnesses. You guys said, no, I haven't even mentioned them. 2 years ago, they shadow banned 2 members of this committee. 4 members of Congress were shadow banned 2 years ago, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate, 535, only 4. Only 4. Gates, Meadows, Nunes, Jordan, only 4 get shadow banned. And of course, what did Mr. Dorsey tell us? He said, oh, it was just a glitch in our algorithm. I asked him, what'd you put in the algorithm? The names Gates, Meadows, Nunes, Jordan? I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I heard it was just a glitch, I wouldn't be as wealthy as our witnesses, but I'd be doing all right. We've heard that excuse time and time again. May 28th, Twitter censors President Trump's tweet on the riots in Minneapolis. May 29th, 2020, Twitter censors the White House for quoting the president's comments about the riots in Minneapolis. June 23rd, 2020, Twitter censors the president again for saying he'll enforce the rule of law against any autonomous zone in Washington, D.C. You can tweet all you want about the autonomous zone that happened in Seattle, but the president tweets that he's not going to have one in Washington, D.C. Nope, you can't do that. You get banned, you get censored. Dozens of examples. Oh, I forgot one. Just last week, July 21st. Here's what Twitter did. The leader of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, this is from the largest state sponsor of terrorism. Twitter allows this tweet, quote, the Islamic Republic of Iran will never forget the martyrdom of Soleimani and will definitely strike a reciprocal blow in the United States. So you can threaten the citizens of this great country, the leader of the largest state sponsor of terrorism, that's just fine. But the president says he's not going to allow some autonomous zone in D.C. and he gets censored. All kinds of examples, most of them from this year, and that's what's I think critical for us all to understand. Most of them from this year, an election year. And that's what concerns me and so many Americans, because we saw what Google did in 2016. We all know about the email the day after the election where top executives at Google email chain where they talked about the silent donation Google made to the Clinton campaign. Now, thank goodness it wasn't enough. And in spite of their efforts to help Clinton, President Trump won. But we're 97 days before an election. And the power, as the previous chairman and ranking member have said, the power these companies have to impact what happens during an election, what American citizens get to see prior to their voting is pretty darn important. That's why this committee hearing is important. Look, we all think the free market's great. We think competition's great. We love the fact that these are American companies. But what's not great is censoring people, censoring conservatives, and trying to impact elections. And if it doesn't end, there has to be consequences. There have to be consequences. That's what I'm concerned about, and I think what so many Americans are concerned about. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, Mr. Chairman. And before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, we have a colleague. I would ask unanimous consent that Mr. Johnson, the ranking member of the Constitution Subcommittee, be allowed to participate in today's hearing, which is our customary practice for subcommittee hearings.
The gentleman makes a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Chairman, I would object.
Objection is heard. I now have the pleasure
Mr. Chairman,
of introducing today's
why
witnesses.
are we not allowing, it is customary.
Mr. Jordan, there was a unanimous consent request, objection was heard, and now we'll introduce our witnesses.
This has never happened.
It is now my pleasure to introduce
the Judiciary
today's
Committee.
witnesses. Our first witness is Jeff Bezos, the Chief
this
Executive
is-
Officer. Mr. Jordan, I have the time.
But this is the ranking
Our
member
first
of the Constitution.
witness
We're talking
is-
about people's liberties here. We got the
Mr.
ranking
Jordan,
member.
you made a unanimous consent request. Objection was heard. Those are our rules.
Objection was.
It is now my
by
pleasure to introduce today's witnesses.
by the Mr.
Our first
Constitutional Law
witness is
professor.
Jeff Bezos, the Chief
Put your
Executive
mask on.
Officer of Amazon.com. Mr. Bezos founded Amazon in Excuse me, I'm going to remind members of this committee, unless you are speaking, our rules require you to wear a mask according to the attending physician. No, I'm speaking about another member of this committee. I'll begin again. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. Our first witness is Jeff Bezos, the Chief Executive Officer of Amazon.com. Mr. Bezos founded Amazon in 1994 as an online bookstore. Since then, Amazon has grown to be the largest online retailer on the internet. Mr. Bezos has also oversees his company's expansion into areas including cloud computing, digital streaming, and artificial intelligence. Mr. Bezos received his Bachelor's of Science from Princeton University. Our second witness, Sundar Pichai, is the Chief Executive Officer of both Alphabet and its subsidiary Google. Mr. Pichai joined Google in 2004 and has helped manage a number of successful products, including Google Chrome, Gmail, and the Android operating system. Mr. Pichai also oversaw the company's popular search products. Prior to his time at Google, Mr. Pichai worked in management consulting at McKinsey. Mr. Pichai received a degree in metallurgical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, a master's degree from Stanford University, and an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Our third witness is Tim Cook, the Chief Executive Officer of Apple. Mr. Cook joined Apple in 1998 and served as its Chief Operational Officer under Steve Jobs. In 2011, Mr. Cook was named CEO. While at Apple, he has overseen their expansion into new markets through the launch and developments of products and services like Apple Pay, Apple Watch, iCloud, Apple Card, and HomePod. Prior to joining Apple, Mr. Cook served as the Director of North American Fulfillment for IBM. Mr. Cook received a Bachelor of Science from Auburn University and an MBA from Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. The last witness at today's hearing is Mark Zuckerberg, founder, chairman, and CEO of Facebook. Mr. Zuckerberg initially launched Facebook in order to help connect college students at his school more easily. Since then, the company has grown into the world's largest social media platform with 1.7 billion global daily active users. Mr. Zuckerberg attended Harvard University before leaving to focus full-time on developing Facebook. We welcome all of our distinguished witnesses and thank them for participating in today's hearing. And now we'll begin by swearing you in. And before I do that, I want to also remind you that you are the only ones from your respective companies invited to testify today, and that in accordance with normal House practice and Section G of the House Remote Committee Proceeding Regulations, your sworn testimony must be your own. Please let me know if at any point in the hearing you wish to mute yourself so you can confer with your counsel. So will you please unmute your microphones and raise your right hands? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God?
Yes.
Yes.
Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and you may remain seated. Please note that your written statements will be entered into the record in their entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light in WebEx. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Mr. Bezos, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Cicilline, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, and members of the subcommittee. I was born into great wealth, not monetary wealth, but instead the wealth of a loving family, a family that fostered my curiosity and encouraged me to dream big. My mom, Jackie, had me when she was a 17-year-old high school student in Albuquerque. Being pregnant in high school was not popular. The school tried to kick her out, but she was allowed to finish after my grandfather negotiated terms with the principal. She couldn't have a locker, no extracurriculars, and couldn't walk across the stage to get her diploma. She graduated and was determined to continue her education, so she enrolled in night school, bringing me, her infant son, to class with her throughout. My dad's name is Miguel. He adopted me when I was 4. He was 16 when he came to the US from Cuba by himself shortly after Castro took over. My dad didn't speak English, and he did not have an easy path. What he did have was grit and determination. He received a scholarship to college in Albuquerque, which is where he met my mom. Together with my grandparents, these hardworking, resourceful, and loving people made me who I am. I walked away from a steady job on Wall Street into a Seattle garage to found Amazon, fully understanding that it might not work. It feels like just yesterday I was driving the packages to the post office myself, dreaming that one day we might afford a forklift. Customer obsession has driven our success, and I take it as an article of faith that customers notice when you do the right thing. You earn trust slowly, over time, by doing hard things well, delivering on time, offering everyday low prices, making promises and keeping them, and making principled decisions, even when they are unpopular. And our approach is working. 80% of Americans have a favorable impression of Amazon overall. Who do Americans trust more than Amazon to do the right thing? Only their doctors and the military. The retail market we participate in is extraordinarily large and competitive. Amazon accounts for less than 1% of the $25 trillion global retail market and less than 4% of US retail. There's room in retail for multiple winners. We compete against large, established players like Target, Costco, Kroger, and of course, Walmart, a company more than twice Amazon's size. 20 years ago, we made the decision to invite other sellers to sell in our store, to share the same valuable real estate we spent billions to build, market, and maintain. We believe that combining the strengths of Amazon store with the vast selection of products offered by third parties would be a better experience for customers, and that the growing pie of revenue and profits would be big enough for all. We were betting that it was not a zero-sum game. Fortunately, we were right. There are now 1.7 million small and medium-sized businesses selling on Amazon. The trust customers put in us every day has allowed Amazon to create more jobs in the United States over the past decade than any other company. Hundreds of thousands of jobs across 42 states. Amazon employees make a minimum of $15 an hour, more than double the federal minimum wage. And we offer the best benefits that include comprehensive health insurance, 401k retirement, and parental leave, which includes 20 weeks of paid maternity leave. More than any place on earth, entrepreneurial companies start, grow, and thrive here in the US. We nurture entrepreneurs and startups with stable rule of law, the finest university system in the world, the freedom of democracy, and a deeply accepted culture of risk-taking. Of course, this great nation of ours is far from perfect. Even as we remember Congressman John Lewis and honor his legacy, we're in the middle of a much-needed race reckoning. We also face the challenges of climate change and income inequality, and we're stumbling through the crisis of a global pandemic. Still, with all of our faults and problems, the rest of the world would love even the tiniest sip of the elixir we have here in the US. Immigrants like my dad see what a treasure this country is. They have perspective and often can see it even more clearly than those of us who were lucky enough to be born here. It is still day one for this country, And even in the face of today's humbling challenges, I have never been more optimistic about our future. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm very happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bezos. Mr. Pichai, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, and members of the subcommittee. Before I start, I know this hearing was delayed because of the ceremonies to honor the life of your colleague, Representative John Lewis. Because of his courage, this world is a better place. He'll be deeply missed. At its heart, a discussion about competition is a discussion about opportunity. This has never been more important as the global pandemic poses dual challenges to our health and our economy. Expanding access to opportunity through technology is personal to me. I didn't have much access to a computer growing up in India, so you can imagine my amazement when I arrived in the US for graduate school and saw an entire lab of computers to use whenever I wanted. Accessing the internet for the first time set me on a path to bring technology to as many people as possible. It inspired me to build Google's first browser, Chrome. I'm proud that 11 years later, so many people experience the web through Chrome for free. Google takes pride in the number of people who choose our products. We are even prouder of what they do with them. From the 140 million students and teachers using G Suite for education to stay connected during the pandemic, to the 5 million Americans gaining digital skills through Grow with Google, to all the people who turn to Google for help, from finding the fastest route home to learning how to cook a new dish on YouTube. Google's work would not be possible without the long tradition of American innovation, and we are proud to contribute to its future. They employ more than 75,000 people in the US across 26 states. The Progressive Policy Institute estimated that in 2018, we invested more than $20 billion in the US, citing us as the largest capital investor in America that year, and one of the top 5 for the last 3 years. One way we contribute is by building helpful products. Research found that free services like search, Gmail, Maps, and Photos provide thousands of dollars a year in value to the average American. And many are small businesses using our digital tools to grow. Stone Dimensions, a family-owned stone company in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, uses Google My Business to draw more customers. Gills Appliances, a family-owned appliance store in Bristol, Rhode Island, credits Google Analytics with helping them reach customers online during the pandemic. Nearly 1/3 of small business owners say that without digital tools, they would have had to close all or part of their business during COVID. Another way we contribute is by being among the world's biggest investors in research and development. At the end of 2019, our R&D spend had increased tenfold over 10 years, from $2.8 billion to $26 billion, and we have invested over $90 billion the last 5 years. Our engineers are helping America remain a global leader in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, and quantum computing. Just as America's technology leadership is not inevitable, Google's continued success is not guaranteed. New competitors emerge every day, and today users have more access to information than ever before. Competition drives us to innovate, and it also leads to better products, lower choices, and more choices for everyone. For example, competition helped lower online advertising costs by 40% over the last decade, with savings passed down to consumers. Open platforms like Android also support the innovation of others. Using Android, thousands of mobile operators build and sell their own devices without paying any licensing fees to us. This has enabled billions of consumers to afford cutting-edge smartphones, some for less than $50. Whether building tools for small businesses or platforms like Android, Google succeeds when others succeed. Competition also sets higher standards for privacy and security. I've always believed that privacy is a universal right, and Google is committed to keeping your information safe, treating it responsibly, putting you in control, and we've long supported the creation of comprehensive federal privacy laws. I've never forgotten how access to technology and innovation changed the course of my life. Google aims to build products that increase access to opportunity for everyone, no matter where you live, what you believe, or how much money you earn. We are committed to doing this responsibly in partnership with lawmakers to ensure every American has access to the incredible opportunity technology creates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pichai. Mr. Cook is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Cicilline and Nadler, Ranking Members Sensenbrenner and Jordan, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony. Before I begin, I want to recognize the life and legacy of John Lewis. I join you in mourning not only a hero, but someone I knew personally, whose example inspires and guides me still. Every American owes John Lewis a debt, and I feel fortunate to hail from a state and a country that benefited so profoundly from his leadership. My name is Tim Cook. I've been Apple's CEO since 2011 and a proud employee of this uniquely American company since 1998. At Apple, we make ourselves a promise and our customers a promise. It's a promise that we'll only build things that make us proud. As Steve put it, we only make things that we'd recommend to our family and friends. You can try to define this difference in a lot of ways. You can call it the seamless integration of hardware and software. You can call it simplicity of design or a great ecosystem. All of those things are true. But if you want to put it simply, products like iPhone just work. When customers consistently give iPhone a 99% satisfaction rating, that's the message they're sending about the user experience. But we also know that customers have a lot of choices and that our products face fierce competition. Companies like Samsung, LG, Huawei, and Google have built successful businesses with different approaches. We're okay with that. Our goal is the best, not the most. In fact, we don't have a dominant share in any market or in any product category where we do business. What does motivate us is that timeless drive to build new things that we're proud to show our users. We focus relentlessly on those innovations, on deepening core principles like privacy and security, and on creating new features. In 2008, we introduced a new feature of the iPhone called the App Store. Launched with 500 apps, which seemed like a lot at the time, the App Store provided a safe and trusted way for users to get more out of their phone. We knew the distribution options for software developers at the time didn't work well. Brick and mortar stores charged high fees and had limited reach. Physical media like CDs had to be shipped and were hard to update. From the beginning, the App Store was a revolutionary alternative. App Store developers set prices for their apps and never pay for shelf space. We provide every developer with cutting-edge tools like compilers, programming languages, and more than 150,000 essential software building blocks called APIs. The App Store guidelines ensure a high-quality, reliable, and secure user experience. They are transparent and applied equally to every developer. For the vast majority of apps, developers keep 100% of the money they make. The only apps that are subject to a commission are those where the developer acquires a customer on an Apple device and where the features or services would be experienced and consumed on an Apple device. In the App Store's more than 10-year history, we have never raised the commission or added a single fee. In fact, we've reduced it for subscriptions and exempted additional categories of apps. I'm here today because scrutiny is reasonable and appropriate. We approach this process with respect and humility, but we make no concession on the facts. What began as 500 apps is now more than 1.7 million, only 60 of which are Apple software. If Apple is a gatekeeper, what we've done is open the gate wider. We want to get every app we can on the store, not keep them off. The App Store's economic contributions are significant. The ecosystem is responsible for 1.9 million jobs in all 50 states, and it facilitated $138 billion in commerce in the U.S. in 2019 alone. I share the committee's belief that competition promotes innovation, that it makes space for the next great idea, and that it gives consumers more choices. Since Apple was founded, these things have defined us. The first Mac brought opportunity and possibility into the home. The iPod helped musicians and artists to share their creations and be paid fairly for it. This legacy does much more than make us proud. It inspires us to work tirelessly to make sure tomorrow will be even better than today. Thank you very much. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Mr. Zuckerberg is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Before I begin, I want to add my voice to those honoring Congressman John Lewis and his service to our country. America has lost a real hero who never stopped fighting for the rights of every person. Chairman Cicilline, Ranking Member Sensenbrenner, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. The tech industry is an American success story. The products we build have changed the world and improved people's lives. Our industry is one of the ways that America shares its values with the world and one of our greatest economic and cultural exports. Facebook is part of this story. We started with an idea to give people the power to share and connect, and we've built services that billions of people find useful. I'm proud that we've given people who've never had a voice before the opportunity to be heard, and given small businesses access to tools that only the largest players used to have. Since COVID emerged, I'm proud that people have used our services to stay in touch with friends and family who they can't be with in person, and to keep their small businesses running online when physical stores are closed. I believe that Facebook and the US tech industry are a force for innovation and empowering people. But I recognize that there are concerns about the size and power of tech companies. Our services are about connection, and our business model is advertising, and we face intense competition in both. Many of our competitors have hundreds of millions or billions of users. Some are upstarts, but others are gatekeepers with the power to decide if we can even release our apps in their app stores to compete with them. In many areas, we're behind our competitors. The most popular messaging service in the US is iMessage. The fastest growing app is TikTok. The most popular app for video is YouTube. The fastest growing ads platform is Amazon. The largest ads platform is Google. And for every dollar spent on advertising in the US, less than 10 cents is spent with us. We're here to talk about online platforms, but I think the true nature of competition is much broader. When Google bought YouTube, they could compete against the dominant player in video, which was the cable industry. When Amazon bought Whole Foods, they could compete against Kroger's and Walmart. When Facebook bought WhatsApp, we could compete against telcos who used to charge 10 cents a text message, but not anymore. Now people can watch video, get groceries delivered, and send private messages for free. That's competition. New companies are created all the time, all over the world. And history shows that if we don't keep innovating, someone will replace every company here today. And that change can often happen faster than you expect. Of the 10 most valuable companies a decade ago, only 3 still make that list today. And if you look at where the top technology companies come from, a decade ago, the vast majority were American. Today, almost half are Chinese. Aside from competition, there are other serious issues related to the internet, including questions about elections, harmful content, and privacy. And while these are not antitrust issues and are not specifically the topic of today's hearing, I recognize that we are often at the center of these discussions. We build platforms for sharing ideas, and important debates play out across our services. I believe that this ultimately leads to more progress, but it means we often find ourselves in the middle of deep disagreements about social issues and high-stakes elections. I personally don't believe that private companies should be making so many decisions about these issues by themselves. And that's why last year, I made the case that there needs to be new regulation for the internet. Facebook stands for a set of basic principles: giving people voice and economic opportunity, keeping people safe, upholding democratic traditions like freedom of expression and voting, and enabling an open and competitive marketplace. These are fundamental values for most of us, but not for everyone in the world. Not for every company we compete with or the countries they represent. And as global competition increases, there is no guarantee that our values will win out. I'm proud of the services we build and how they improve people's lives. We compete hard. We compete fairly. We try to be the best. That's what I was taught matters in this country. And when we succeed, it's because we deliver great experiences that people love. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, and I thank the witnesses for your opening statements. Before I begin recognizing members for questioning under the 5-minute rule, without objection, I'm going to enter into the hearing record the documents and exhibits majority members will be referencing in their questioning today. These materials have been distributed to the witnesses. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Bachai, over 85% of all online searches go through Google. Every online company in the United States depends on Google to reach users. A business may sink or swim based on Google's decisions alone. Numerous online businesses told us that Google steals their content and privileges its own sites in ways that profit Google but crush everyone else. Most businesses asked to stay anonymous due to fears that Google would retaliate against them. One entrepreneur, Brian Warner, told us his website was thriving until Google stole his content. After Google's decision, traffic to his website dropped by 80%. He had to downsize his business and lay off half his staff. He told us, and I quote, "If someone came to me with an idea for a website or a web service today, I'd tell them to run as far away from the web as possible. Launch a lawn care business or dog grooming business, something Google can't take away as soon as he or she is thriving." So my first question, Mr. Bachai, is why does Google steal content from honest businesses?
Mr. Chairman, with respect, I disagree with that characterization. Just last week, I met with many small businesses. In fact, today we support 1.4 million small businesses, supporting over $385 billion in economic activity. We see many businesses thrive, particularly even during the pandemic. Businesses, an example, Kettle Kings in Texas, which sells kettlebells. They've really
Mr. Bachai,
expanded.
I have a limited amount of time, so I don't want to interrupt you, but my question is very specific. We heard throughout this investigation that Google has stolen content to build your own business. These are consistent reports, and so your testimony that doesn't happen is really inconsistent with what we've learned during the course of the investigation, but I'll move on to a new question. Mr. Bachai, most Americans believe that when they enter a search query that what Google shows are the most relevant results. But increasingly, Google just shows whatever is most profitable for Google, be it Google Ads or Google's own sites. And so my question, Mr. Bachai, isn't there a fundamental conflict of interest between serving users who want to access the best and most relevant information and Google's business model, which incentivizes Google to sell ads and keep users on Google's own sites?
We've always focused on providing users the most relevant information, and we rely on that trust for users to come back to Google every day. In fact, a vast majority of queries in Google, we don't show ads at all, and we show ads only for a small subset of queries where the intent from users is highly commercial. For example, they may be looking for something like TV sets or so on.
But Mr. Bachai, what is the value of the part that you do use the Google ads for? I mean, it's a substantial part of your business. What's the actual value? 200 billion, 300 billion?
In terms of revenue, it's around $100+ billion. But
that's a lot of money, Mr. Bachai. Let me move on. Really, Mr. Bachai, it's Google's business model that is the problem. Our documents show that Google evolved from a turnstile to the rest of the web to a walled garden that increasingly keeps users within its sites. Emails show that over a decade ago, Google started to fear competition from certain websites, web pages that could divert search traffic and revenue from Google. These documents show that Google staff discussed the proliferating threat, is how it was described, that these web pages posed to Google. Any traffic lost to other sites was a loss in revenue. One of Google's memos observed that certain websites were getting, and I quote, too much traffic. So Google decided to put an end to that. Mr. Bachai, you've been at Google since 2004. Were you involved in these discussions about the threat from vertical search?
Congressman, without knowing the specifics, it's, I'm not fully clear of the context, but definitely when we look at vertical searches, it validates the competition we see. For example, when users come looking to shop online, independent studies show that over 55% of product searches originate with Amazon and over 70% originate with the major e-commerce companies. In the few categories which are commercial in nature, we see vigorous competition, be it travel, be it real estate, and we are working hard.
Well, let me ask very specifically, Mr. Pichai.
There.
The evidence that we collected shows that Google pursued a multi-pronged attack. First, Google began to steal other web pages' content. For example, in 2010, Google stole restaurant reviews from Yelp to bootstrap its own rival local search business. Mr. Pichai, do you know how Google responded when Yelp asked you to stop stealing their reviews? Well, I'll tell you, our investigation shows that Google's response was to threaten to delist Yelp entirely. In other words, the choice Google gave Yelp was, let us steal your content or effectively disappear from the web. Mr. Pichai, isn't that anti-competitive?
Congressman, when I run the company, I'm really focused on giving users what they want. We conduct ourselves to the highest standard. Happy to engage, understand the specifics, and answer your questions further.
Thank you. And just one final series of questions, Mr. Pichai. Did Google ever use its surveillance over web traffic to identify competitive threats?
Congressman, just like other businesses, we try to understand trends from data which we can see, and we use it to improve our products for our users. But we are really focused on improving our products, and that's how search
I appreciate
works.
that, Mr. Pichai. Google's own documents and numerous interviews with companies affected by this conduct show that somewhere on Google's own websites. And to me, that's evidence that Google is increasingly a walled garden, which keeps users on Google sites, even if Google doesn't have the most relevant information and it's economically catastrophic for other companies online. And so my time is running out, but Mr. Pichai, I'll just end by saying the evidence seems very clear to me. As Google became the gateway to the internet, it began to abuse its power. It used its surveillance over web traffic to identify competitive threats and crush them. It has dampened innovation and new business growth, and it's dramatically increased the price of accessing users on the internet, virtually ensuring that any business that wants to be found on the web must pay Google a tax. And with that, I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for his first round of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've been in Congress 42 years. That's coming to an end at the end of this year. I'm breathing a sigh of relief. But during that period of time, during the decade of the 90s and the zeros, I was involved as chairman of the Science Committee and chairman of this committee, and trying to make the net universal, and open it up to everybody. And one of the theses that we used is the net should end up becoming basically the debate on issues, not only in our country, but throughout the world. And in exchange for that, this committee and the Congress gave internet service providers immunity, so if somebody said something defamatory in what they posted, the ISPs could not be a part of a lawsuit for defamation. Now, after hearing Mr. Jordan give a long line of censorship of conservative viewpoints, I'm concerned that the people who manage the net, and the four of you manage a big part of the net, are ending up using this as a political screen. Conservatives are consumers too. And the way the net was put together in the eyes of Congress is that everybody should be able to speak their mind. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Jordan's litany of censorship zeroes in on Facebook. Exactly what are your standards in, quote, filtering out political speech that maybe some people out there don't agree with?
Congressman, thank you for the opportunity to address this. Our goal is to offer a platform for all ideas. We want to give everyone in the world a voice to share their experiences and ideas. A lot of that is day-to-day things that happen in their lives. Some of it is political. And frankly, I think that we've distinguished ourselves as one of the companies that defends free expression the most. We do have community standards around things that you can and cannot say. I think you would likely agree with most of them. They ban categories of harm such as promoting terrorist propaganda, child exploitation, incitement of violence, some more legalistic things like intellectual property violations, and they also ban things like hate speech that could lead to dehumanizing people and encouraging violence down the road.
If I may ask a specific of you, it was reported that Donald Trump Jr. got taken down for a period of time because he put something up on the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. Now, I wouldn't take it myself, but there still is a debate on whether it is effective either in treating or preventing COVID-19. And I think that this is a legitimate matter of discussion, and it would be up to a patient and their doctor to determine whether hydroxychloroquine was the correct medication, given the circumstances. Now, why did that happen?
Congressman, well, first, to be clear, I think what you might be referring to happened on Twitter, so it's hard for me to speak to that, but I can talk to our policies about this. We do prohibit content that will lead to imminent risk of harm, and stating that there's a proven cure for COVID when there is in fact none might encourage someone to go take something that could have some adverse effects. So we do take that down. We do not prohibit discussion around trials of drugs or people saying that they think that things might work, or personal experiences with experimental drugs. But if someone is going to say that something is proven when in fact it is not, that could lead people.
Wouldn't that be up for somebody on the other side of the issue to say that this is not proven? And, I know as a fact that, for people with certain conditions, it's contraindicated and they shouldn't take it on that. But wouldn't that be up to somebody else, to say, okay, what somebody posted on this really isn't true, and here's what the facts are, rather than having a Twitter or a Facebook take it down?
Congressman, in general, I agree with you, and we do not want to become the arbiters of truth. I think that would be a bad position for us to be in, and not what we should be doing. But on specific claims, if someone is going to go out and say that hydroxychloroquine is proven to cure COVID, when in fact it has not been proven to cure COVID, and that statement could lead people to take a drug that in some cases, some of the data suggests that it might be harmful to people, we think that we should take that down. That could cause imminent risk of harm.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the distinguished chair of the full Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler from New York, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I want to thank you for providing us information during our investigation. However, the documents you provided tell a very disturbing story. And that story is that Facebook saw Instagram as a powerful threat that could siphon business away from Facebook. And so rather than compete with it, Facebook bought it. This is exactly the type of anti-competitive acquisition that the antitrust laws were designed to prevent. Now, let me explain what I mean. Mr. Zuckerberg, you have written that Facebook can likely always just buy any competitive startups. In fact, on the day Facebook bought Instagram, which you described as a threat, you wrote, quote, "One thing about startups is you can often acquire them," close quote. Mr. Zuckerberg, you were referring to companies like Instagram in that quote, weren't you?
Congressman, I don't have the exact document in front of me, but I've always been clear that we viewed Instagram both as a competitor and as a complement to our services. In the growing space around after smartphones started getting big, and they competed with us in the space of mobile cameras and mobile photo sharing. But at the time, almost no one thought of them as a general social network. And people didn't think of them as competing with us in that space. And I think that the acquisition has been wildly successful. We were able to by acquiring them, continue investing in it and growing it as a standalone brand that now reaches many more people than I think either Kevin, the co-founder, or I thought would be possible at the time, while also incorporating some of the technology into making Facebook's photos sharing products better. So yes.
Okay. Now, in early 2012, when Facebook contemplated acquiring Instagram, a competitive startup, you told your CFO that though nascent, Instagram could be very disruptive to us. And in the weeks leading up to the deal, you described Instagram as a threat, saying that, quote, Instagram can meaningfully hurt us without becoming a huge business, unquote. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, what did you mean when you described Instagram as a threat, as disruptive? And when you said that Instagram could meaningfully hurt Facebook, did you mean that consumers might switch from Facebook to Instagram?
Congressman, thanks for the opportunity to address this. At the time, there was a small but growing field of
Did you mean that consumers might switch from Facebook to Instagram? That was my question.
Thanks, Congressman.
Yes or no? Did you mean that?
In the space of mobile photos and camera apps, which was growing, they were a competitor. I've been clear about that. And
fine. In February of that year, in February 2012, you told Facebook's chief financial officer that you were interested in buying Instagram. He asked you whether the purpose of the deal was to neutralize a potential competitor or to integrate their products with ours in order to improve our services. You answered that it was a combination of both, saying what we're really buying is time. Even if some new competitors springs up, those products won't get much traction since we'll already have their mechanics deployed at scale. Mr. Zuckerberg, what did you mean when you answered that the purpose of the deal was to neutralize a potential competitor?
Congressman, well, those aren't my words, but yes, I've been clear that Instagram was a competitor in the space of mobile photo sharing. There were a lot of others at the time. They competed with apps like ViscoCam and PicPlease and companies like Path. It was a subset of the overall space of connecting that we exist in. And by having them join us, they certainly went from being a competitor in the space of being a mobile camera to an app that we could help grow and help get more people to be able to use and be on our team. And I think that's been wildly successful.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, mergers and acquisitions that buy off potential competitive threats violate the antitrust laws. In your own words, you purchased Instagram to neutralize a competitive threat. If this was an illegal merger at the time of the transaction, why shouldn't Instagram now be broken off into a separate company?
Well, Congressman, I think the FTC had all of these documents and reviewed this and unanimously voted at the time not to challenge the acquisition. I mean, I think with hindsight, it probably looks like obvious that Instagram would have reached the scale that it has today, but at the time it was far from obvious. A lot of the competitors that they competed with in mobile sharing, including companies like Path, which were hot at the time and had great founders and entrepreneurs running them. Dave Moore and I worked closely with him. I mean, I don't even think Path exists today. It was not a guarantee that Instagram was going to succeed. The acquisition has done wildly well, largely because not just of the founders' talent, but because we invested heavily in building up the infrastructure and promoting it and working on security and working on a lot of things around this. And I think that this has been an American success story.
Well, thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, you're making my point. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I want to end where I began. Facebook, by Mr. Zuckerberg's own admission and by the documents we have from the time, Facebook saw Instagram as a threat that could potentially siphon business away from Facebook. And so rather than compete with it, Facebook bought it. This is exactly the type of anti-competitive acquisition that the antitrust laws were designed to prevent. This should never have happened in the first place. It should never have been permitted to happen, and it cannot happen again. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would remind the witness that the failures of the FTC in 2012, of course, do not alleviate the antitrust challenges that the chairman described. And with that, I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Colorado, and again, thank him for co-hosting one of the most important field hearings we had along with Mr. Neguse in Colorado that I think was very critical in this investigation. And you're recognized from 5 minutes, Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to offer my appreciation to you for the bipartisan way that you have approached the subcommittee's investigation. I want to start by saying that capitalism is the greatest instrument for freedom this world has ever seen. Capitalism has given the United States the freedom and means to defeat the Soviet Union, beat back fascism, and put a man on the moon. This economic system has lifted millions out of poverty. It has made America the freest, most prosperous nation in the world. Our witnesses have taken ideas born out of a dorm room, a garage, a warehouse, and built these dreams into 4 of the biggest power players in the digital global economy. You have all enjoyed the freedom to succeed. Now, let me be clear. I do not believe big is necessarily bad. In fact, big is often a force for good. However, I want to address one particularly disturbing issue. Mr. Pichai, in October 2018, Google dropped out of the running for a Pentagon contract to complete the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, or JEDI contract, which was valued at more than $10 billion. Google's stated reason for removing itself from the bidding process is that the U.S. military's project did not align with Google's corporate values and principles. This is the same U.S. military that fights for our freedoms and stands as a force for good across the globe. These are the same soldiers, sailors, and airmen that sacrifice their lives to ensure you have the freedom to build your company and set your corporate policies without fear of government interference, unlike in communist China. I also find it very interesting that only months after making this decision to withdraw from the JEDI contract, Marine General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned the Senate Armed Forces Committee that the Chinese military was directly benefiting from Google's work. It made me wonder what values Google and communist Red China had in common. I asked myself, is it that the Chinese Communist Party imprisons Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, like it is shown on the chart behind me? Could it be that China forces slaves to work in sweatshops? Maybe they align on the design to suppress free speech in Hong Kong. Did Google agree with CCP's decision to lie to the world about the COVID-19 pandemic? Then I thought about Google's Dragonfly experiment. I wondered if perhaps you agreed with the Chinese government's use of technology platforms to spy on its own people and enforce draconian security laws. Maybe it's that your company is aligned with the Chinese Communist Party's corporate espionage policies, where the strategy is to steal whatever can't be produced domestically. These values that allow Google to work with the Chinese military but not the U.S. military help explain why Google wouldn't think twice about blatantly stealing a competitor's product, right down to the watermark, without any hint of attribution. Mr. Pichai, during our field hearing in my home state of Colorado, I heard a story that sounded so brazen and contrary to free market principles that I thought it must have been straight from the Chinese Communist Party's corporate espionage playbook. Google took advantage of a company that relied on your search engine to build its brand and compete. Google misappropriated lyrics from Genius Media Group's website and published those lyrics on Google's own platform. However, Genius caught Google in the act, quite literally red-handed. When Genius suspected this corporate theft was occurring, the company incorporated a digital watermark in its lyrics that spelled out red-handed. In Morse code, Google's lyric boxes contained the watermark, showing that your company stole what you couldn't or didn't want to produce yourself. After Google executives stated that they were investigating this problematic behavior, Genius created another experiment to determine the scope of the misappropriation. It turns out that out of 271 songs where the watermark was applied, 43% showed clear evidence of matching. Your company, which advertises itself as a doorway to freedom, took advantage of this small company, all but extinguishing Genius's freedom to compete. Google is supposed to connect people to information. Your corporate values once stood for freedom, a platform that let capitalism flourish and helped bring countless people across the globe out of poverty. My question to you, Mr. Pichai, do you think that Google could get away with following China's corporate espionage playbook if you didn't have a monopolistic advantage in the market?
Congressman, I want to be able to address the important concerns you raised. First of all, we are proud to support the U.S. government. We recently signed a big project with the Department of Defense where we are bringing our world-class, zero trust-based cybersecurity approach to help protect Pentagon networks from cybersecurity attacks. We have projects underway with the Navy, with Department of Veterans Affairs. Happy to follow up and explain more. We have a very limited presence in China. We don't offer any of our services, search, maps, Gmail, YouTube, etc. in China. And with respect to music, we license content there. In fact, we license content from other companies. And so this is a dispute between Genius and the other companies in terms of where the source of the content is. But again, happy to engage and explain what we do here further.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cook, with over 100 million iPhone users in the United States alone, and with Apple's ownership of the App Store, giving Apple the ability to control which apps are allowed to be marketed to Apple users, you wield immense power over small businesses to grow and prosper. Apple is the sole decision maker as to whether an app is made available to app users through Apple's App Store. Isn't that correct?
Sir, the App Store, thank you for the questions. The App Store is a feature of the iPhone, much like the camera is and the chip is.
Yeah.
And so
my point is, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to get to the point. Point is that Apple is the sole decision maker as to whether an app is made available to app users through the Apple Store. Isn't that correct?
If it's a native app, yes, sir. If it's a web app, no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And throughout our investigation, we've heard concerns that rules governing the App Store review process are not available to the app developers. The rules are made up as you go. They are arbitrarily interpreted and enforced and are subject to change whenever Apple sees fit to change. And developers have no choice but to go along with the changes, or they must leave the App Store. That's an enormous amount of power. Also, the rules get changed to benefit Apple at the expense of app developers, and the App Store is said to also discriminate between app developers with similar apps on the Apple platform, and also as to small app developers versus large app developers. So, Mr. Cook, does Apple not treat all app developers equally?
Sir, we treat every developer the same. We have open and transparent rules. It's a rigorous process. Because we care so deeply about privacy and security and quality, we do look at every app before it goes on. But those rules apply evenly to everyone. And as you can tell by going from...
Some developers are favored over others, though. Isn't that correct?
That is not correct. And as you can tell from going from just 500...
I'll give you an example. Baidu has two App Store employees assigned to help it navigate the App Store bureaucracy. Is that true?
I don't know about that, sir.
Well, you don't have other app developers who have that same access to Apple personnel, do you?
We do a lot of things with developers, including looking at their beta test apps, regardless of whether they're small or large.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. Apple has negotiated exceptions to its typical 30% commission for some apps like Amazon Prime. Is a reduced commission such as the one that Amazon Prime gets available to other app developers?
It's available to anyone meeting the conditions, yes.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Apple requires all app developers to use Apple's payment processing system if those developers want to sell their goods or services to Apple users through Apple's App Store. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, because it's
by processing payments for apps that you allow into the App Store, you collect their customer data, and you use that data to inform Apple as to whether whether or not it would be profitable for Apple to launch a competing app. Isn't that correct?
Sir, 84% of the apps are charged nothing. The remaining 16% either pay 15 or 30, depending upon the specifics. If it's in the second year of a subscription, as an example, it only pays 15%. If you look back at history...
What's to stop Apple from increasing its commission to 50%?
Sir, we have never increased commissions in the store since the first day it operated in 2008.
There's nothing to stop you from doing so, is it?
No, sir, I disagree strongly with that. There is a competition for developers just like there's a competition for customers. And so the competition for developers, they can write their apps for Android or Windows or Xbox or PlayStation. So we have fierce competition at the developer side and the customer side, which is essentially, it's so competitive, I would describe it as a street fight for market share in the smartphone business.
Has Apple ever retaliated against or disadvantaged a developer who went public about their frustrations with the App Store?
Sir, we do not retaliate or bully people. It's strongly against our company culture.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Zuckerberg, in his written testimony, made the claim that Facebook is an American company with American values. Do any of the rest of you take a different view? That is to say that your companies don't embrace American values. It's great to see that none of you do. Mr. Pichai, I'm worried about Google's market power, how it concentrates that power, and then ultimately how it wields it. Project Maven was a collaboration between Google and the Department of Defense that Google pulled out of, citing ethical concerns, and you made the decision to pull out of that joint venture following receipt of a letter from thousands of your employees saying that Google should not be in the business of war. My question, Mr. Pichai, is did you weigh the input from your employees when making the decision to abandon that project with the United States military?
Congressman, thanks for your concern. As I said earlier, we're deeply committed to supporting the military and the U.S. government. We have undertaken several projects since then. We do take our employees' input into account, but it's one input. We make decisions based on a variety of factors. As a company, we were new in the cloud space at that time. Since then,
thank you. That's a sufficient answer that you did take their feedback into account. And in fact, some of your Googlers have recently sent you a letter where they've asked you to exit other partnerships as a consequence of ethical concerns. They've asked you to stop doing business with American law enforcement, saying that police broadly uphold white supremacy and that Google should not be engaged in any services to police. And as you well know, you provide some of the most basic services to police, like email, but you also provide services that help keep our cops safe when they're doing their job. And so my question is here in front of Congress and the American people, will you take the pledge that Google will not adopt the bigoted anti-police policy that is requested in the most recent letter?
Congressman, we have a long track record of working with law enforcement when it is supported by due process and the law. We push back against overbroad requests. We are transparent about the requests we get, but we have a long history of following the law and cooperating with law enforcement.
I understand the history. I'm asking about the future. To the law enforcement that are watching today, can they rest assured that under your leadership, Google will not adopt these bigoted anti-police policies?
Congressman, we are committed to continuing to work with law enforcement in a way that's consistent with law and due processes in the U.S.
Well, I greatly appreciate that, and I know that will be very comforting to the police who utilize your services. You mentioned earlier in the discussion about China that your engagement in China was very limited, but yet Google has an AI China Center. The Chinese Academy of Sciences has published a paper saying that enhanced the targeting capabilities of China's J-20 fighter aircraft. You collaborate with Chinese universities that take millions upon millions of dollars from the Chinese military. Matter of fact, one of your Googlers, Fifi Li, while under your employ, was cited in Chinese state media saying, "China is like a sleeping giant. When she wakes, she will tremble the world." The former Secretary of Defense, Mr. Shanahan, said that the lines have been blurred in China between commercial and military application. And as Mr. Buck cited, General Dunford says that your company is directly aiding the Chinese military. And Peter Thiel, who actually serves on Mr. Zuckerberg's board at Facebook, said that Google's activities with China are treasonous. He accused you of treason. So why would an American company with American values so directly aid the Chinese military, but have ethical concerns about working alongside the U.S. military on Project Maven? And I understand your point about cybersecurity and those things, but Project Maven was a specific way to ensure that our troops are safe on the battlefield. And if you have no problem making the J-20 Chinese fighter more effective in its targeting, why wouldn't you want to make America as effective?
Congressman, with respect, we are not working with the Chinese military. It's absolutely false. I had a chance to meet with General Dunford personally. We have clarified what we do in China compared to our peers. It's very, very limited in nature. Our AI work in China is limited to a handful of people working on open source projects, and happy to share and engage with the office to explain our work in China further.
Gosh, I mean, when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says that an American company is directly aiding China, when you have an AI center, when you're working with universities, and when your employees are talking about China trembling the world, it seems to really call into question your commitment to our country and our values. I see my time's expired. I hope we have an additional round, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, as you know, the proliferation of fake Facebook accounts was a key tool in the strategy of Russian interference in the American election in 2016. American law enforcement, the Senate, the House, have all found that Vladimir Putin engaged in a sweeping and systematic campaign to undermine American democracy in 2016 and to work for a victory for Donald Trump. In his remarkable book, Mind Blank, and I'm being polite here, Cambridge Analytica and the Plot to Break America, whistleblower Christopher Wiley, who worked for several years at Cambridge Analytica, recounts how the Russian assault on America in Cambridge Analytica's research depended on Facebook. Quote, "When Cambridge Analytica launched in the summer of 2014, Steve Bannon's goal was to change politics by changing culture. Facebook data, algorithms, and narratives were his key weapons. The Cambridge Analytica team used these tools to identify people who exhibited the three traits in what they called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. They then proceeded to bombard and activate these people, a small percentage of the American public, but still millions of people, with increasingly dark and manipulative messages from fake Facebook pages, both to get them to vote for Trump, but more importantly, to activate them as racists and white nationalists." And he goes on to describe the remarkable success of this campaign, both electorally, but also politically in the country in terms of sowing the terrible racial and ethnic divisions that you see in America today. So they waged a mass campaign of psychological warfare to polarize America around race and religion and to activate racists and anti-Semites. And it worked splendidly for them, but it didn't work so well for America. So Mr. Zuckerberg, which parts of this narrative have you addressed, or are you planning to address, or do you just see that essentially as the cost of being a forum and a marketplace for ideas? Is there nothing that can be done about the use of Facebook to engender social division in America?
Congressman, thank you. Since 2016, there have been a lot of steps that we've taken to protect the integrity of elections. We've hired, I think it's more than 30,000 people to work on safety and security. We've built up AI systems to be able to find harmful content, including being able to find more than 50 different networks of coordinated and authentic behavior, basically nation states trying to interfere in elections.
Can I pause you? Let me just pause you there for a second, because I'm interested in that. The Stop Hate for Profit campaign is a coalition that includes the Color of Change, the Anti-Defamation League, and other civil rights groups, and they're targeting Facebook right now for a boycott because of the rapid spread of hate messages online, the presence of Boogaloo and other right-wing extremist groups trying to infiltrate and disrupt Black Lives Matter protests, and the fact that alt-right, racist, and anti-Semitic content flourishes on Facebook. So they're asking you to remove these pages and essentially to join the movement for civil rights by not allowing that kind of content. Their boycotters include a lot of big companies, including Patagonia, Levi's, McDonald's, VW, Heineken, and so on. But you seem not to be that moved by their campaign, and I just wonder what you think about what they're asking you to do.
Congressman, thanks. We're very focused on fighting against election interference, and we're also very focused on fighting against hate speech. And our commitments to those issues and fighting them go back years before this recent movement. Since 2016, the defenses that the company has built up to help secure elections, not just in the US, but around the world, I think are some of the most advanced that any company or government has in the world now. We routinely now collaborate with law enforcement and intelligence agencies and are able to sometimes identify threats coming from other countries before governments are even able to. In terms of fighting hate, we've built really sophisticated systems. Our goal is to identify it before anyone even sees it on the platform. And we've built AI systems and, as I mentioned, have tens of thousands of people working on safety and security with the goal of getting this stuff down so that way before people even see it. And right now, we're able to proactively identify 89% of the hate speech that we take down before I think it's even seen by other people. So, you know, I want to do better than 89%. I'd like to get that to 99%. But we have a massive investment here. We invest billions of dollars.
Just my time's almost out. Can you just address the proliferation of fake accounts? I understand annually you get 6.5 billion fake accounts produced there, but in some sense you have a profit motive that's linked to that because that's what's reported to your investors, the number of accounts. Are you working zealously to try to ferret out these fake accounts that are used to spread hate and disinformation?
The gentleman's time has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
Congressman, absolutely. We work hard on this. We take down billions of fake accounts a year. A lot of that is just people trying to set up accounts to spam people for commercial reasons. A very small percent of that are nation states trying to interfere in elections, but we're very focused on trying to find those. Having fake and harmful content on our platform does not help our business. It hurts our business. People do not want to see that stuff, and they use our services less when they do. So we are aligned with people in order to take that down, and we invest billions of dollars a year in doing so.
Yield back, thank you.
The committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes while we fix a technical feed with one of our witnesses.